personally, I can say that we are already a world-class army, world-class armed forces.
What if I told you that a country with no nuclear weapons, a fraction of the military budget of its enemies, and decades of international sanctions managed to make the most powerful nations on Earth think twice before attacking it? Not because it won every battle, not because it had the biggest army, but because it prepared, quietly, strategically, for 30 years. That's the Iran story. And it's not really about Iran. It's about a lesson that every small nation, every nation sitting next to a bigger, hungrier neighbor, needs to understand right now. Because the world has changed. The era of diplomacy will handle it, and we have allies is colliding hard with a new reality. Hard power is back. Missiles are being stockpiled. Defense budgets are exploding. Japan is rearming for the first time since World War II. Taiwan is turning itself into a fortress. Ukraine, a country many military analysts expected to fall in days, is still standing years later. Why? Because they prepared. And the countries that didn't prepare? History doesn't remember them kindly. So where does the Philippines stand in all of this? A nation of over 7,600 islands, surrounded by some of the most contested waters on the planet, sitting at the crossroads of global trade routes, facing pressure that isn't going away. This isn't fear-mongering, this is strategy. And today, we're going to walk through exactly what the modern world is teaching us. Through blood, through billions of dollars, and through hard-won experience, about what it actually takes for a nation like the Philippines to survive, to deter, and to remain free. Because peace, as history keeps proving over and over again, does not belong to the hopeful. It belongs to the prepared. Before we talk about weapons, before we talk about budgets or alliances or military strategy, let's talk about something that was decided long before any of that. Geography. Because where a country sits on the map isn't just a detail, it's a destiny. And for the Philippines, that destiny placed it right in the middle of one of the most contested, most strategically valuable, most fought over stretches of water on the entire planet. Over 7,600 islands, more than 36,000 kilometers of coastline, one of the longest in the world. Now here's where it gets serious. The South China Sea, sitting directly to the west of the Philippines, carries roughly 30% of all global maritime trade every single year. We're talking about $5.3 trillion worth of goods moving through those waters annually. Oil, consumer products, food, energy. Nearly 20% of the world's petroleum flows through that region. Alfred Tyre Mahan, one of history's greatest naval strategists, wrote back in 1890, "Whoever rules the waves, rules the world." He said that before aircraft carriers existed, before missiles existed. And it is still true today, word for word. Control that sea, and you control the economic lifeline of half the world. That's leverage. And the Philippines sits right at the edge of all of it. But this isn't some distant future threat to worry about later. It's already happening. Right now. Filipino fishermen, people whose families have fished these waters for generations, are being blocked, harassed, and turned away from Scarborough Shoal, a shoal that sits well inside the Philippines' own exclusive economic zone. Philippine resupply missions heading to Second Thomas Shoal are being shadowed, obstructed, and challenged, not with open warfare, but with something arguably more insidious. Pressure. Constant, calculated, grinding pressure. No declaration of war. No dramatic invasion. Just the slow, deliberate squeezing of a nation's access to its own waters. British naval strategist Julian Corbett said it perfectly. The object of naval warfare is the control of communications. And right now, those communications, those fishing grounds, those shipping lanes, those energy corridors are under threat. And then there's the numbers. China operates the largest navy in the world by ship count. Over 370 vessels, 3 aircraft carriers, more than 50 destroyers, 60 submarines, satellites, long-range missiles, a blue water navy capable of projecting power thousands of miles from its shores. The Philippines? 2 modern guided missile frigates, several patrol vessels, 0 submarines, 0 destroyers, 0 aircraft carriers. That is not just an imbalance, that is a structural vulnerability. And here's the brutal truth that ties it all together. When a nation cannot protect its waters, it doesn't just lose military ground. It loses its fish. It loses its oil. It loses its trade routes. It loses the economic foundation that holds everything else together. The sea is not just where Filipino soldiers may one day have to fight. The sea is where Filipino families already depend on for survival. And right now, that sea is slipping out of reach. Something has been quietly shifting inside the Philippine military over the last decade, and most people haven't noticed. For years, for decades actually, the armed forces of the Philippines was built around one mission: fighting internal threats. Insurgencies, rebel groups, internal stability. That was the job. But then the world outside started changing. Fast. And the Philippines had to make one of the most difficult decisions any military can make: completely reimagine what it exists to do. From fighting enemies within its own borders to defending its waters, its skies, and its islands from threats coming from the sea. That transition is still happening right now. And how well it succeeds may determine the future of this nation. Start with the Navy, because in an archipelago of over 7,600 islands, the Navy isn't just important, it's everything. And the honest truth is, the Philippine Navy is growing, but it is still thin. The crown jewels right now are 2 guided missile frigates, the BRP Jose Rizal and the BRP Antonio Luna. Modern ships, real capability, anti-ship missiles, air defense systems, anti-submarine weapons, helicopter operations. For the Philippines, these are a genuine leap forward. But 2 frigates for over 36,000 kilometers of coastline? That's the reality. And the number that keeps coming up in every serious strategic conversation about the Philippine Navy is 0. 0 submarines. Vietnam has 6. Indonesia has 5. China has over 60. Submarines are the great equalizer of naval warfare. Silent, unpredictable, devastating. Without them, maritime defense has a hole in it that no amount of patrol vessels can fill. The Air Force tells a similar story, progress, but still catching up. The primary combat aircraft right now is the FA-50, a light combat jet. The Philippines operates around 12 of them. 12. China fields over 9,900 fighter aircraft. Indonesia around 110. Vietnam around 70. Now, to be fair, the FA-50 is capable and reliable. But light combat aircraft were never designed to defend a nation against advanced aerial threats alone. The skies over the Philippine Sea need something heavier, something with longer range and real strike power. And that gap is one of the most urgent items on the modernization list. But here's where the Army brings something genuinely exciting to the table: the BrahMos, a supersonic anti-ship missile system jointly developed by India and Russia. Range of up to 400 kilometers. Speed of nearly Mach 3. The moment the Philippines deployed BrahMos batteries along its western coast, it acquired something it had never really had before: the ability to threaten enemy ships at long range. From land. That changes the equation in a real way. But here's the thing about military power that most people miss. It's not just about the weapons. Fuel. ammunition, maintenance, supply chains. And the Philippines is still building that foundation. The defense budget sits at around $5 billion a year. China spends $225 billion. Japan, $50 billion. Indonesia, $10 billion. That gap isn't just about money, it's about what money buys over decades. Ships, aircraft, training, infrastructure, stockpiles. The Philippine Armed Forces today are not a weak force. They are a force in transition, with real strengths, real momentum, and real professionals serving in them. But they are also a force with gaps: no submarines, limited fighters, an air defense network still being built, missile density that needs to grow. And in modern warfare, Karl von Clausewitz had a warning that still rings true today: the first act of judgment is to establish the kind of war on which they are embarking. The Philippines has identified the war. Now the question is whether it can build the force fast enough to fight it. Here's something that military history keeps proving, over and over again, in every war ever fought. Nations don't lose everywhere at once. They lose at one point. One weak link. One gap that the enemy finds, exploits, and breaks open. The Germans didn't lose World War II because they were weak everywhere. They lost because their supply lines collapsed, their air force was overwhelmed, and their eastern front stretched beyond what any army could sustain. But here's the part that comes before that. The nations that survive contact with the enemy are the ones that found their weak points before the enemy did. So today, we're going to do something uncomfortable. We're going to look honestly at where the Philippines is exposed. Not to be pessimistic, but because knowing where the gaps are is the only way to close them. Then there's the air. The Philippine Air Force operates around 12 FA-50 jets. 12, against a region where China fields over 1,900 fighters, and even smaller neighbors like Vietnam and Indonesia operate far larger fleets. And without a proper layered air defense system, the kind that combines long-range radar, medium-range missiles, short-range guns, and fighter interception all working together, the skies above the Philippine Sea have blind spots. Gaps. And in modern warfare, blind spots don't stay empty for long. But here's what makes all of this truly urgent. Wars don't start with an invasion. Not usually. They start with a test. A foreign vessel lingers near a disputed reef. Then another one shows up. Then resupply missions get blocked. Then fishing boats get turned away. Then before anyone has officially declared anything, the pressure has already been applied, the presence has already been normalized, and rolling it back becomes exponentially harder. Winston Churchill warned, "The empires of the future are the empires of the mind." Deterrence is psychological. It lives in the calculation an adversary makes when it asks itself, is this worth it? Is this going to cost us too much? And right now, with no submarines, limited fighters, missile coverage that still has gaps across the island chain, and logistics depth that is still being built, that calculation doesn't carry enough weight. Each gap on its own is manageable. But together, they tell a story that says, there are corridors here that haven't been closed yet. There are windows that haven't been locked. And in geopolitics, unlocked windows don't stay unnoticed forever. There's an old Latin phrase that military strategists have been repeating for over 2,000 years. Si vis pacem, para bellum. If you want peace, prepare for war. The Roman military writer Vegetius wrote that long before aircraft carriers, before missiles, before nuclear submarines. And yet here we are in the 21st century, and that sentence is still the most honest summary of how the world actually works. Because here's the uncomfortable truth that every government eventually has to face. Preparation costs money. Real money. But weakness? Weakness costs more. It costs fishing grounds. It costs trade routes. It costs sovereignty. It costs the kind of slow, grinding losses that don't show up on a defense budget, but absolutely show up in a nation's history. So today we're going to talk about the price tag of keeping the Philippines free. And yes, the numbers are big. But stay with me, because the alternative is bigger. The Philippines currently spends around $5 billion a year on defense. That sounds like a lot until you put it next to the neighbors. China spends $225 billion annually. Japan just crossed $50 billion. South Korea is at $45 billion. Even Vietnam, a country roughly similar in economic size to the Philippines, spends around $7 billion and is growing fast. And the Philippines? Right now, defense spending sits at about 1.3% of GDP, well below the 2% threshold that strategic planners consider the minimum for a nation facing real maritime pressure. Now here's what a real modernization program actually costs. Defense projections put the total requirement for the next 10 to 15 years at somewhere between $30 and $35 billion. That number includes everything. Submarines at roughly $600 to $800 million each, with a target of at least 3, putting the submarine program alone at around $2.5 to $3 billion. A proper frigate fleet of 6 to 8 modern warships would run another $2 to $3 billion. Advanced multi-role fighter jets, around 20 aircraft, would cost approximately $5.5 to $6 billion, including weapons, training, and support. And that's before radar networks, air defense missile systems, and logistics infrastructure. Big numbers. Absolutely. But spread across 15 years, this is a manageable investment for a nation with a growing economy. Here's the good news. This doesn't have to happen all at once. Smart modernization unfolds in phases. In the first 3 years, the priority is expanding missile coverage, strengthening radar networks, and adding patrol vessels, an investment of roughly $5 to $7 billion. Years 4 through 8 focus on the heavy lifting: submarines, new frigates, advanced fighters, another $12 to $15 billion. And the final phase, years 9 through 15, consolidates everything into an integrated defense system with deep logistics and hardened infrastructure, around $10 to $13 billion more. And the money doesn't all have to come from one place. Defense bonds, foreign military financing, industrial offsets, public-private shipbuilding partnerships, technology transfer agreements. These are all tools that other nations have used to spread the financial weight without breaking their economies. But here's the warning that military historian Basil Liddell Hart left us. The only thing harder than getting a new idea into the military mind is to get an old one out. The greatest enemy of modernization is never really money. It's delay. It's inertia. It's the assumption that there's still time. Because history doesn't wait for budget cycles. And the window to build real deterrence before pressure becomes something worse is open right now. The question is whether the Philippines will walk through it. No country builds its military alone, not even the most powerful ones. The United States doesn't manufacture every component of every weapon system it fields. France doesn't. Japan doesn't. South Korea didn't, and look at South Korea now. A nation that once depended almost entirely on foreign suppliers for its defense needs today builds its own warships, its own tanks, its own fighter jets, and exports them to countries around the world. That transformation didn't happen because South Korea got lucky. It happened because South Korea made deliberate choices about who to partner with, what technology to acquire, and how to build domestic capability over decades. American strategist George Kennan put it plainly: the strength of nations lies not only in their resources, but in the alliances they build. For the Philippines, this is exactly where modernization gets practical. Because the question is no longer just what does the Philippines need? It's where does it come from, who can deliver it, and how fast. So let's walk through the roster. The United States is the anchor. Decades of treaty partnerships, joint exercises, intelligence sharing, and equipment transfers form the backbone of Philippine external defense. Fighter aircraft discussions alone involve packages worth $5 to $6 billion. But the US comes at a price, and that's where the other partners fill in. South Korea has become one of the most important suppliers the Philippines has. Fast delivery, competitive pricing, high-quality shipbuilding. The two modern guided missile frigates that now form the core of the Philippine Navy? Built in South Korea, Japan brings something different. Not just hardware, but maritime radar systems, coastal monitoring technology, and a long-term strategic commitment to stability in the region. India brings the BrahMos, that supersonic missile flying at nearly Mach 3, turning Philippine coastlines into defensive walls at a fraction of what a fleet of destroyers would cost. And Europe, France, Sweden, Germany brings technical depth, submarine design, advanced sensors, electronic warfare systems that no Asian supplier currently matches. Put it all together, and what the Philippines is building isn't just a shopping list. It's a multi-source defense network, deliberately designed so that no single supplier can become a bottleneck, no single relationship can be used as leverage, and no single point of failure can leave the armed forces without options. That is smart procurement. And smart procurement, done consistently over the next 15 years, is what turns a force in transition into a force that cannot be ignored.